Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome my very special guest today. In lieu of a panel, I have with me Cy Wakeman, who is a drama researcher, international leadership speaker, consultant, and founder of Reality-Based Leadership. She is the author of 4 books, including the New York Times bestseller, The Reality-Based Rules of the Workplace, Know What Boosts Your Value, Kills Your Chances, and Will Make You Happier, and, most recently, Life's Messy, Live Happy. Described as the secret weapon to restoring sanity to the workplace, Cy was voted in the top 100 leadership professionals to follow on Twitter for 7 years in a row. For the last 3 years, she has ranked #1 among the Global Guru's list of top 30 leadership professionals across the globe. Cy, thanks so much for being back with me.
Always a pleasure. I love these invites and I love the topics you bring up.
Well, speaking of which, here is our topic. In a recent op-ed posted in The Hill, disaster avoidance expert Gleb Tsipursky writes, quote, "In the brave new world of hybrid work, where the lines between office and home are blurred, employers are navigating uncharted waters. Some have resorted to a draconian approach, implementing surveillance measures to monitor their employees' productivity." Mr. Tsipursky goes on to describe how corporations such as JP Morgan and Barclays Bank, among others, seem to be suffering from, quote, "productivity paranoia," unquote, leading them to track employee emails and even keystrokes. Is it working? According to Glassdoor, 41% of employees feel less productive while being closely monitored. And according to Harvard Business Review, surveillance makes employees substantially more likely to engage in various rule-breaking behaviors, such as taking unapproved breaks, disregarding instructions, damaging workplace property, and even stealing office equipment. Apparently, the lack of trust makes people less trustworthy. It seems reasonable that employers want to ensure that employees are actually doing their jobs. So how can bosses and managers implement a trust but verify protocol that promotes worker integrity while avoiding the creation of a toxic culture? And what lessons can we take from these observations that will help us have healthier relationships, both in the office and outside of work as well? When I read this article, I thought of you, Cy. So.
Why did you think of me? I
Because
talked a little
because
bit
this is the
about,
kind of thing you fix.
yes, it is the kind of thing. I don't know that we fix. We certainly invite people to have better conversations and to do a more intentional job of identifying what is a win-win, how we can achieve many goals with less offensive behavior and systems. So, which gets us into grappling with the gray, right? A lot of people want to know what to do and is this right or wrong? Like even our question about these things polarizes it from the beginning. It's like, should employers monitor or not? It's like, well, they need some visibility into productivity, makes sense. And we need people to also have relationships based in trust. So therein lies the rub.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is it I mean we always speak in terms of pre-COVID and post-COVID, but is there a certain assumption that when people are in the workplace, they're more likely to be doing their jobs, and when they're home, there's more of a concern they might get distracted into other areas?
Yeah, there's so many archaic belief systems behind all of that. They're very anecdotal. You know, I love kind of evidence-based practice. And I do think that there's some faulty assumptions that one's location or even time spent on an activity is directly correlated to the outcome of that activity, or it's really old metrics. Is you're behind in a chair where I can see you, or can I measure the time you put into something? And it gets us really into or far away from measuring results, outcome, impact, solutions. Because I may only interact with one of my team members for 10 minutes today, but the high value impact I had in those 10 minutes probably saved a $2 million deal. So it's like, what I think is really happening here is I think people are, instead of self-regulating their own anxiety and evolving through upping their skill sets, they're transferring their anxiety to inconvenience other people. What do I mean by that? If I have a tool that shows when you're online, then I have outsourced my leadership. I've abdicated it. And I have what seems like an easy conversation, although it kills productivity. I noticed you were offline for 2.5 hours. And, I need to know what that's about. The measuring just transactional and not transformational, that behavior will bring people down to low level ego behaviors out of rebellion. They're very ego bruising. They're very easy to pinpoint as a passive aggressive reason why I'm going to steal from you. Like, I really think that monitoring your work comes from a toggle down behavior. And I invite toggle down behaviors. And now I'm in an ego battle. And so I think for all of us as leaders, when we're monitoring people's behaviors and we get to over managing, we're by definition under leading. And I think it has a lot to do with your skill sets and whether they're modern, you can lead in a modern environment, then, putting so much energy into managing your people. But I'd be interested to hear what you think about it.
Well, you used a word there, and every time every time you speak, I have like six things that come into my head I want to follow up on. But you use the word transactional, and if leaders are perceived as acting transactionally with their employees, it sends the message, and just sort of paraphrasing what you said, that I'm seeing my employee as an asset
Yeah.
rather than as a human being.
Humanizing.
And that dehumanizing. And then you have this, what we just heard about, that if you treat me as if I'm untrustworthy, I will start behaving in a way that's untrustworthy.
Yeah.
So the concern over the behavior and the surveillance actually creates the problem. It's like these science fiction movies where they go back
Yeah.
in time to fix the past and end up causing it to happen.
Today's solution is tomorrow's problem for sure. I think it can be if it's a unilateral solution, if it's not well rolled out. Now, I also want to put on the part where it's like, and I know Gleb personally, fantastic researcher and workplace author. He baited us a little bit because he wrote in the article this draconian approach. And I also want to highlight that a lot of times we perceive insult where there isn't any. So we have shared accountability in this. I worked with an energy company, a utility company back in the States long, long ago. And I knew the CEO personally, and he had 2 employees over the course of a year that had been injured and not found right away. They were out in a home on a service call alone. One was injured by a customer and one was injured by kind of a mini explosion. So his response is, he said, I want everyone to wear trackers. I know his heart. His heart was, we're sending people into some, challenging circumstances into people's homes and neighborhoods that, are experiencing some crime. And the union representative took that as the biggest offense ever. And now they're like tracking us wherever they go, where they want to know us. And the CEO even brought them into the tracking where they weren't even capturing that data in the center. They just said, if we see someone, out on the site, not, responding to radio, we will check if they're okay. And it became this huge blown out of proportion incident. And I know that particular person's heart. I don't think it is the bank's heart in tracking your keystrokes. I'm just using this. We also have to be careful what story we assign to it. Is it tracking or visibility? If someone wants visibility towards what I'm doing while I'm under contract with them, I owe them visibility. I owe them openness and results and outcomes. And so that's another side of it to understand is a lot of times if we see leaders and employees as arch enemies, we're going to interpret lots of behavior to, not give benefit of the doubt, or even come to say, I understand your need for visibility. How do we do this without it feeling like it's transactional, dehumanizing, and a lack of trust? And I think that's our way back towards one another, is to see the motive of the behavior as something bigger than what we've boiled it down to. My employer, I think, has a right to visibility of what I'm doing.
You remind me that I saw a video a while back complaining about the practices of Walmart and some of these big box stores of checking your receipt on the way out. And they can't do that. They don't have the right to do it. And I was coming out of Costco one day, and I handed my receipt to the checker, and she's going down the list. And says, "Oh, they double charged you for something." She caught a mistake that saved me money.
But you didn't see that coming. You just are seeing your civil rights being
Well,
violated.
yeah,
Many
exactly.
people can see their civil rights being violated. And one of the things I think that's happening so often when we're fear-based, like productivity is, monitoring can be very fear-based. We're not in our highest skill set when we're operating out of fear-based. We're not having our deeper conversations when we're in fear-based kind of toggle down ego behaviors. And so I just really encourage people when they get down to these questions, I'm like, if we want better answers, let's ask better questions. And I don't think we spend enough time before we jump into solutioning, perfecting the questions. I mean, most frustrating part of my master's degree is I couldn't get my preceptor to okay my research question. I mean, it took months. I'm like, I will never get this research done. And they said, once you get the right question, the research will basically just do itself. It'll be effortless. And it was in the working with my committee to get the right questions so we solved the right issue. And right now we buy solutions. They end up on the loading dock and installed before we've really said, well, what are we solving for? And I think this is a case of that. I'd be so interested to be curious and compassionate and just saying, what are you solving for? Because I would offer them different solutions.
I mean, ultimately, isn't it the responsibility of leadership to clarify to the rank and file why they're implementing particular policies? Like
I
some of the
think
cases we've
so.
talked about, there may be very good reasons, like your case, that we want to protect our employees, and they're perceiving this as a lack of trust when it's really entirely the opposite. That should be able to be easily fixable or preventable.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's both a shared accountability because if you ever try to clarify something with someone who's dead set on misunderstanding you, right? And so it's joint. Gottman's talk about in their research in marriage about how important it is to turn towards one another. And when someone, reaches out, even if it's an imperfect repair attempt, the key for a good relationship is that person reaches past the imperfect repair attempt and said, that wasn't the apology I was hoping for, but good on you for turning towards me. Let's talk. And I think that really is we're abandoning so many of those growth moments together for leaders to come out and talk more clearly about what their intent is, and for them to ask the people they work with to also lean in and work out any risks of a decision together. I think it's important, but I would also tell you that the same behavior can't please a high accountable and a low accountable at the same time. And so part of the solution is, why don't I have a team where I don't have to track them? Why am I not only staffing myself with mid and high accountable folks? Because they're going to deliver based on their internal controls. I'll need less external controls, and I'll just need check and verify metrics, but they're going to deliver and partner with me on how they best deliver, what our goals are, what the results are, and how we can get that done. And a lot of times we put these systems in place to solve the wrong issue. We want to put these systems in place to keep low accountables motivated. And the systems will backfire on low accountables. They'll just be more passive aggressive because they're the victims here. High accountables don't respond the same way to the systems. They don't love the systems, but they are not the ones coming back passive aggressive. Um, Yahoo did this 100 years ago. Do you remember Yahoo? They were concerned about the commute for their California team. So they said, you know, we're going to implement work from home. And they sent everybody home. And they found out that overall productivity went down. And so they canceled work from home and brought everybody back. And what they failed to notice that I was able to do with some of my data at the time is that productivity went up for the mid and high accountables because they had flexibility, all the things we have found out. Productivity went down for the low accountables, and some of the low accountables are actually employed by two different organizations. So instead of dealing with accountability levels and just firing people who can't work well, um, in a remote environment, instead of fixing the performance, they mandated everyone return back as if no one could be trusted. They didn't differentiate. And what ended up happening is they lost a ton of their high accountable talent. Their talent left them. And so I think the more draconian, as Gleb said, your measures are, the more you're chasing after the low accountables that will not respond well, and the more those types of behaviors, you're going to lose the high accountables, your best workplace. They can get jobs anywhere, and they don't love that. And so I think I would love to know what they're solutioning for, because I think they have accountability issues, not productivity issues. I would imagine it's not the same across the board, and they've implemented the same solution across the board.
Yeah, and you're really getting into one of the topics that gets me worked up is this binary thinking.
Yeah.
Either we send everybody home to work remotely, or we don't let anybody work remotely from home. It's just too complicated for us to
Well,
deal
it's avoiding all
with.
the gray, right? We don't like cognitive dissonance. We're not going to play in the gray. Because I, as a leader, would have to say, why does Dimitri get to work from home and I don't? And as a leader, I would need to say, well, because Dimitri really has proven, themselves to be very um, on target with their outcomes, the quality of their work, their responsiveness. Like they're really doing well with that. And I have not yet seen you earn your way into that. You want to work from home? Yes. Then here's what I need you to develop and improve my trust in you, and I'll let you work from home. And that's really where we have to get to, each according to their own, which some people see it as not equal. It isn't, but it can be very equitable. And you can really feed and nourish people in wherever they are in their development at that same time. But we're trying to kind of automate some things that I think we need to stay pretty human about.
Yeah, I think that's a key. When it comes to accountability, is it realistic to hire for accountability, or is that something that only sort of reveals itself over time?
The answer is probably both, right? Our hiring practices, it's hard to predict future behavior, but there are some things we know about doing that. A lot of it has to do with past behavior. Um, One of my best accountability tests, one of my clients had, after your like second interview, when you're in the final, they would have you read one of Cy Wakeman's books and come back and talk about, did you agree or disagree? Or they would actually ask specifically, like, where'd you agree and where'd you disagree? And that told a lot about accountability levels. But we can test for accountability levels, both in behavior-based interview, in people's references, and in tests that we put to them. I'm not recommending this. You check out the legality of all of this. But one of the ways we test in our company for accountability is, one of the behavior questions we ask is, think of a time that you were an influential person on a project that didn't deliver. And what is that specifically? And then we say, and what was your part in that? And if someone self-reflects, they're usually pretty highly accountable. A lot of times people in the interview would say, well, first I have to tell you about the place I worked. My boss was really ineffective and the board was really out to get us. And if they start into circumstances, or they tell us like what happened or how other people, I will hire the person that said, that was the moment I realized how underskilled I was in project management and how stubborn I was. I wouldn't ask for help, and I held a grudge against my coworkers, so I wouldn't reach out to them. And I just really wish I had a do-over. I'm like, Amen.
Yeah.
Like, come on over. Another thing we did when we were hiring some trainers is we would give them the training, and then we would say, you're going to present to Cy tomorrow. We wanted to test if they could quickly get a presentation together. And Cy will be here at 9 tomorrow. So that made him a little nervous. And you're going to present for 10 minutes in front of Cy. And to keep it fair, we will send out the modules you're going to train on at 5 o'clock tonight. You'll get the link. So you'll have from 5 on to prepare. And we made sure the link was broken. And what we were testing is resiliency and ownership. And we had one show up the next day and said, sorry, there was nothing I can do. There wasn't like a link. The link didn't work. And she's not wrong. But in our business, I need to know your resiliency and your accountability level. We had another person who actually got the job who was like, oh my gosh, when I saw the link was broke, I figured I better get to work. You have so much out on YouTube. I listened to a bunch of your podcasts. I came up with like a model. I watched some of your videos on YouTube. And they go, and little known fact, true story, they go, I know your cousin Tony. And he had some old workbook of yours that I got him to send me pictures of. And so I thought maybe this is the model I was presenting on, but nonetheless, it's going to be good. And those were the variations in our candidates who on paper were like perfect. All of them were perfect for the job. So I think you can test for accountability. I think you can lead to foster accountability. I think we're all capable of being highly accountable. And so I think the way you lead makes a difference too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's going to come back to trust. If I demonstrate that I don't trust you, then I'm basically telling you that I don't trust you to be accountable.
Well,
Um,
I'm gonna, yeah, absolutely.
I wonder, we heard our parents or our grandparents tell us about how the days when, handshake was all you needed on a contract and people didn't lock their doors at night. And as society becomes increasingly suspicious, we become suspicious of one another. I think it's inevitable that's going to spill over into every aspect of our lives. And what you mentioned earlier about, the way I like to frame it is presume positive intent. Wait to know somebody's really out to get you before you assume that they are. Our default now seems to be one of suspicion.
I think it, I think there's some accuracy to that. And sometimes when I hear people talk about, how we used to be, one of the elements I think changed is we quit taking care of one another. Um, and that's a big part of trust. Like as our communities got more diverse and we're living with more and more people that we have failed from a social net standpoint, and people that we haven't taken good care of. I grew up in a small town. We never locked our doors. We never this, but we had a very strong element of not judging and always helping where I grew up. And so I think it's easy to lose trust for people who you feel like don't care about you. And I think a main question leaders need to answer, I think it was Lou Holtz way back, Notre Dame football. I can't believe I'm quoting Lou Holtz, but he said, everybody's got 3 questions they want to ask of you. One is, do you care about me? Like, do you really care about me? And the second is, can I trust you? And the third one is, are you committed to excellence? Like, will you call out a bad result or an unethical, quandary? Um, I worked as a therapist with women. This group happened to be women, people who identified as women, and their situation was that they had been in relationships that they had been abused, domestic violence, like they had been hit or emotionally abused. And so their recovery in the beginning is your brain really has changed and you're not seeing the world quite correctly and you're not believing yourself worth. So that's like first aid, that's like trauma care. And then after about a year, we're like, now let's skill you up so that you can live in the world differently, so that you can have your own boundaries, protect your own safety. And the reason I bring this up, because the number one thing that would happen when women started to want to engage in relationships again is they would come with the statement, I want to date again, but I just, I can't trust men if men were their preference. And I'm like, so the dilemma you want me to solve is that half of the population, gender wise, are like not able to be trusted. Like that seems like we're solving the wrong thing. And I said, I think it's more about this. It's not about whether or not people are trustworthy, because if you're in a relationship, people will fail your trust. I don't hit people, but just today I didn't communicate something to my team. If your ability to trust me is that I act perfectly, then it's not a mountain I can climb. Um, Trust is more about when I fail you, I own it and make amends and make changes. But I would work with these women. I would say, well, what if your issue wasn't that you can't trust men? What if your issue is that you can't yet trust yourself around men? What if I worked with you to build skill sets and boundaries? Or when you're on a date and the person you're with was unkind to a server, what if I built your ability to just say, that's kind of a deal breaker for me. I'm going to catch a cab home. Like, what if we build your sense of worth up, and then you can move through the world freely. You can move through the world skillfully, and you'll know red flags, and you'll know, how to ask for what you need. And that was the model that we worked on. So when I read the question that you said you were going to post today, it really brought it into a lot of leaders are saying, I can't trust my employees. And what I'm wondering is that, can you not trust yourself around employees? And what if we skilled you up leading in a modern world instead of the old world, that if you can't see an employee virtually or, visibly, that they aren't working? Like what if we worked on those belief systems? And then people could, flourish on your team and be rewarded. People that floundered could be coached and developed, and people that opted out through their behavior at work, you could help them transition out of the organization. What if we went back to the basics and you just got more skilled leading in hybrid environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all want to live in a society, in a community, work in a job environment where everything's humming the way it's supposed to be. I know when I taught high school for 20 years for the same principal, and he was an extraordinary principal. He was not a perfect human being. He had his good points and bad points like all of us, but he was so fiercely loyal to his faculty
Oh,
based on the philosophy that if I treat my people well, they will teach the students well. And he told us the subject, and then he said, "Go do it. And if you need help, ask for it."
for
So I hire professionals. I assume you know what you're doing. And if there are problems, I'm here to help you. And we were this tiny school, private school, with no academic admissions requirements at all. And yet our students typically had the highest test scores, or par
cool.
with the most prestigious elite private schools in the state. And it all came from this style. I remember there was this one teacher, he was a graduate student, and he was teaching science or math, and he was frequently late and sometimes absent. And the principal walked in one day and found him playing cards with the students. And he finally, and this is after several warnings, and he said to him, "You're fired." He says, "No, I need this for my doctorate. I'll work for free." He says, "I don't want you to work for free. I want to
Yeah.
pay you.
Yes. I would love
But
to
I need a
pay.
teacher, not a babysitter."
Exactly. And this is such an important thing when I talk about accountability, because instead of implementing a system that is witch hunting, for the low performer, just lead and fire the low performer, or the one who's not stepping up. High accountables want differentiation, which is called leadership. They're like the care that principal gave your community of faculty, that you don't have to work with somebody who is, just babysitting. It's not what we do here. We have a higher standard. That behavior actually increases trust.
Right.
If people can trust that you'll call out lack of excellence, like, it's a silly example, but I'm really bad at shopping for myself. And so when I do have like an event or something that I have to, like, show up and be seen, I tend to take a friend with me. And in the beginning, I would take like my bestie. And I began to not be able to trust her in this role because everything she's like, oh, I think it looks great. I think it looks great. The person I took was probably one of my most critical friends. 7 of the outfits, because I knew there's no way it can all look great. Like it just was statistically improbable. 7 maybe of the 10 outfits, she's like, don't even go out of the dressing room. That's horrific. You're not buying that. When she finally said, that's amazing,
You
I
knew
had
it
high
was.
trust because I trusted that she would tell me it wasn't. And I think that part of trust is in a relationship where people are willing to give an honest yes and an honest no and coach that in the willingness, like, I'm with you. Let's keep the dialogue going. Like, so what hurts trust is when people abandon. They're like, here's work. I'm not here for you. Your principal said, if you need me, ask for help. That hurts trust, abandoning, but also lack of differentiation hurts trust. And so, I often think too, like, if all we're down to is you monitoring my keystrokes and, if that's my job, it probably is a job that could be automated. I mean, if my whole job is down to like how many keystrokes I make, what notes I took on a customer service call, like, I get where we have to listen in for legalities and we have to do some random auditing and we have to, there's reasons we listen in on customer service calls for coaching and we record some of these things. But I think when you resort down to that, I have to wonder, like, is there anything left of our relationship, that it's so transactional at this point? Like, then you should automate my job. Like AI could be able to do my job because the highest value I give and the highest value my employees give could not be monitored in productivity. Sometimes it's walking with a question for 2 months. It's just like, here's what I'm pondering and here's what I'm curious about. And I'm like, meditate, walk. Like, I mean, you still have some things to deliver. But when somebody has a eureka moment, they're like, oh my gosh, what's the connection between trust and, accountability level? I'm like, let's do that. And so we're so into productivity and the mastery that we've really gotten out of the mystery. And so much of our breakthroughs come in the mystery, come out of the being with self and reflecting and being with others and congregating and sending people home and monitoring their keystrokes seems like we've reached an all-time low.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much. I mean, it's an old idea. Simon Sinek sort of revived it with Find Your Why, but it's been around for a long time. That when a business or really any community has a sense of purpose, then that is part of what motivates people. I'm not just doing a job. I'm not just earning a paycheck. I'm part of something greater than myself. I mean, one of my books is built on the 12-step recovery system, and I call it ethical rehabilitation. Right? When you have a sense of purpose, it means that you're connected to something more than yourself,
Oh yeah.
and that puts everything in a context that now I'm motivated, I'm structured, I'm focused, and I want to make a positive contribution because I recognize my own importance and the sense that other people are depending on me and I'm depending on them. And that makes us all pull together. I mean, you really can create a flourishing culture if you start at the beginning and work your way through.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And be willing to have conversations together about how we can. And I think that's part of what's missing is, it's discussion, not dialogue. It's like, well, I need to know if you're working. No, you don't. Yes, I do. No, you don't. Yes, I do. No, you don't. No, I'm like, what if it was bigger than that? I need to be able to monitor progress towards goals. I need to measure outcomes. I need to know that you're paying enough attention or that you're engaged. And so, how could we get some of those metrics that would leave you not feeling tracked and dehumanized? And I mean, once you change that question, you end one exhausting conversation about whether we need monitoring or not. Of course we do. and you delve into a better conversation. I think it was David White, the poet, says, if you're involved in an exhausting conversation, just end it. Don't try and perfect it. Don't try and persuade it. End it and get more thoughtful and begin a new conversation. And I think we're just right now really needing to turn towards one another and to begin really good new conversations that is how can we do better? And not me, so that I lead you perfectly. How can we do better? And how can we agree that we do need some sort of system to monitor? And how can we agree that you also need to feel valued? And given those constraints, how do we do this? And so much energy right now is on why we shouldn't have to, if it's right or wrong. It's, as you say, polarizing. Instead of like, how could we? How could we meet all of these needs? I don't think we tap into innovation. I think in curiosity and all those things with questions we're currently asking. I think we tap into what are my rights versus your rights and legalistic mindsets. And, instead of tapping into um, how do we want to be together right now? And I think that's also, fewer people are getting married and fewer people and I think we've lost, you can get married or not married, but I think we've lost the ability to go from transactionally, you're my plus one, to I really want to grow from our relationship and I want to grow you. And like, what's that? How are we going to make that this decade together? What's our focus and what's our agreements? And that stuff's messy. And we've lost our tolerance for messy.
Well, yeah, and that's right in there in the title of your book.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, gosh, there's so many ways we can go on this, but that idea of when you mentioned rights, you hit one of my chimes because in Judaism we're very focused on responsibility and
Oh,
much less
cool.
focused on rights,
Differentiation.
right? Because if I'm taking responsibility for my behavior towards you and you're taking responsibility for your behavior towards me, then our rights
Nobody
are
needs
naturally
right.
going to take care of themselves. But if I'm focused on my rights, then we're going to be bumping into each other all the time. And certainly in a friendship or an intimate relationship, um, my wife and I, we just celebrated our 36th anniversary. And yeah, you can applaud because there are
Yeah,
times that
that's hard. It's hard. I don't care.
I
I
don't
don't
know
care if
how
you
we've
are a
gotten there.
rabbi. Nobody gets you the special. Your marriage will be easy for you badge just because you.
Oh no, it's anything but I didn't realize how much of my personal baggage um, I brought in to the relationship, and I
That's why we
just
have relationships.
and I
No, we can't
discovered,
like our
well,
baggage.
yeah, I
I
mean, I
feel
just
so evolved when I live alone.
well, yeah.
When I'm in a relationship, that's hard.
I
I
mean,
think
right now my wife's on spring break and I work at home, and it's already okay. Tension levels just creeping up around here.
we're kidding. What I like about that, as you share from a Judaism perspective, is rights are something you owe me, and responsibilities are something that I give you. I
Yeah.
take and own and give you. And I think if we're down to demanding something we feel entitled to, we're now in ego and judgment and separation. And it's kind of just, I want hazard pay instead of, um, into responsibility. My being responsible for my own behavior is a gift I can give you, regardless of what the societal rights are, what the country norm is like. It doesn't have to be legalized. It can just be that I commit that no matter what's happening externally. And to me, that's the inner point of validation, which gets to ethics. It's ethics and integrity I can trust.
Yeah, I was thinking if we could pivot a little bit. Um, we're living in a society now that seems to be more politically combative and polarized and partisan than ever, although there's been plenty of that over the ages. Um, but there was another topic that I almost used for our conversation I wanted to do. When I found this one, chose to avoid the politics. But it was a case, without going into the specifics, where an employee posted something political that was critical of the oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't posted. The employee interrupted a speaker to express an objection to a company policy based upon their political views. And the employee was fired.
Oh,
Um,
had the employee been coached on that before, or was this a first offense or just an
um,
egregious offense?
I didn't see that in the article, but it was done very publicly, and it was done in a way that disrupted a company function. And there is this tension between us as individuals and us as members of a team. And there are parts of my private life that I need to keep private when I'm in my professional persona. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
then I feel like, well, I can't really be myself. I can't be who I am. I'm worried about what other people are gonna think about my points of view. And that I think creates another dimension to the tension we feel and to the lack of trust that we may experience.
We're probably, I will sound like a broken record. I think the question is, how can I be authentic to who I am personally and nourish and feed relationships at work? And you'll find a way to be authentic and not offensive. Like, so if somebody was, especially if they're high up in the company and they showed lack of discernment, to me, it's not about their political beliefs. It's about lack of discernment. We have a invited speaker that was talking to, I don't know the article, 300 people. You really hijacked that in an inappropriate way for a personal agenda. So from an HR standpoint, this isn't about political beliefs to me. You can believe whatever you want to believe. I mean, we live in a democracy, and I would hope some of the things you believe are pro-human, that lead you to kindness, not racism. But all I can say is at work, your behavior needs to be in good judgment. And this isn't about your beliefs. This is about you putting your personal preferences over community. And we can't have that level of individualization in this moment at work. So if you had something that you were upset about, let's say that maybe they said something that you factually didn't agree with, or you felt it fed bias, or I'm even okay with you bringing that up. Come and let's talk about the most scholarly, um, appropriate, right avenue and venue to bring that up. But hardly ever will be standing up in a public event, demonstrating or shouting. That's not the norms that we have here.
You
And so
reminded me of
it's
a
those types of
a fellow I
discussions.
knew in seminary. He was a very, very New York style personality, which was fairly new to me, having come from the West Coast. And at one point I said to him, what I like about you? You say everything I think.
I love that. Were they able to do it in the way like I want? So a lot of people are like, so you don't want any robust dialogue. No, I want robust dialogue. But one guy, it was just an example. He would always pound the table. And he would say, I'm just so passionate. And he was a big guy. And like a lot, especially the newbies around the table would be like, traumatized. And I coached him. I go, I'm not asking you to stop your passion. I'm asking you to, like passion shouldn't hurt. Like, how else can you be passionate and make points without like stopping conversation with, pretty bold physical behavior? And I think people boil it down to you're asking me not to be authentic or, but I see in this world right now so much fear behavior and a lot of divisiveness. But when I look at below that, it's fear. And so I think for us as leaders in my personal life, when somebody, is talking in the US, for instance, about a candidate or the other, I like to change the conversation to what are you fearful of and get really curious. And then, ask people like, what's your hopes and dreams? Like personally, what are you hoping to create? And, what would be the best support for that? And it gets them away from politics, talking about real stuff, which is personal to them. Like I get curious about their life because I think the minute that we close our minds, we close our hearts. I think they go together. And so if I find myself closed-minded to somebody, I need to open my heart up and get really loving and curious. Tell me about your family. I heard that you just said goodbye to your mom. And what was that like for you? That's got to be hard. So that I can see him as a human again. Or if my heart's getting closed, I have to open my mind up. Let me understand what it is like working for them, minimum wage, or, in the situation they're in with that health issue. Because I really think our job as leaders right now is the ability to invite people back to center, to be cared for and loved up and called up. But we can't shout leadership from across the ranks. We've got to invite people, come here, it's safe. I'm going to, um, do my part to help in your evolution, and I hope you do your part to help in mine. And I don't think we're doing enough of just getting people calm again and called back to center and turning the conversations into where are you hurting and how can I help right now? And so much of the hurt and angst is going into political. It's like we're intellectualizing our feelings into grievances. And that's the old trick of the ego. If I
Yeah.
wake up feeling anxious, instead of just saying, gosh, I feel really anxious, maybe I should move through the world more carefully, Because when I'm anxious, I jump to conclusions. So I'm going to just be really curious today. That's what adults do. They wake up and they go, I feel anxious. Oh, I know why. My leadership never tells me anything. They withhold information. That's called intellectualizing a grievance. And we've politicized our feelings into grievances. And in the bottom line, we're all just really scared trying to walk each other home, and nobody brought the dang manual with them on what we're even doing here. I call it Earth School. Like somebody dropped me off one day in Earth School. I was a baby, and I still don't get it, but I know collectively we can get it. Like genius is in our collective, and so I just think so many of the questions that are facing us right now come down to your theory about polarized thinking, and I think turning towards one another and getting curious again.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. When I talk about the qualities of an ethical leader, and I use ethics as an acronym, and the E is empathy, and that's where it all starts. If I don't
Empathy's different than
listen,
sympathy.
right? You're describing listening, right? Listen to hear, listen to understand, listen to connect, and then I know who my people are, and
And
I know what
connect
they
is
need.
different than agree. And we've turned a lot of these.
Oh
I'm like,
yeah.
listen to see if I agree with you. I'm like, no, I want to listen to connect. We have very different views. We have different spiritual practices. And we both are parents. And bam, we just got connected. I think that's important. A lot of people are listening to sympathize. And empathy to me is I see you're struggling and I want to validate that experience. I want to see you and I see that struggle. But as a leader, I want to make sure I don't validate the sense you're making of that experience. That's where I can challenge you to reflect and to question your thinking. Sympathy is I see you're struggling and I feel sorry for you. And I go on to agree with you and collude with you. And your world gets smaller because the sympathetic data points you get are like an echo chamber.
Hmm. Interesting
And
distinction.
if what we did with empathy was say, um, I hear how you're struggling. You don't have the protective equipment you need during a world health crisis. I hear that. And they would go on to say, and the meaning I've made of that is that leadership doesn't care. Like they're putting us in unsafe work situations. That's where, as a leader, I have to say, wait a minute, I got to challenge the sense you're making of that. Can you possibly know that to be true? Is that your final answer? Like, where's your evidence? Because once I am anxious for not having the equipment and I've decided leadership doesn't care, 99% of my solutions are gone. What can I do? Leadership doesn't care. I'm a victim. But if I question that, is it true leadership doesn't care? And I go, well, I don't know that to be true. So what if they did care? What would you do? Solutions come readily. Well, I would, send this idea forth, or I would, ask for a meeting with them to see if we could thought partner. And so the sympathy, I think, is really critical right now because we're so divided because we're using sympathy with one another. And I had to use it the other night. I said to one of my dearest friends, I said, can I Google that quick? That's not been my experience in healthcare with the data. He turned to me, he goes, I thought you were a liberal. I thought you were like on my side. How would you question one of my statistics? I'm like, when did I sign up for never questioning our thinking around the
Yeah.
statistical? Because I tend to be more liberal. I'm like, I go, then you don't know me very well. I'm much more complex than that because in so many parts of my life, I'm super conservative. And, but it's funny because I think instead of doing the messy stuff of getting to know who we are with each other today, that's also temporary. It's like once I think you're a liberal, then I just assume you agree with me and we're off and running and we know who the enemy is. It's like, well, once we censor anybody, we are subject to censor. Like there is not one thing we can throw out that doesn't boomerang back to us. Let's take our responsibility seriously.
Yeah, yeah, I've never forgotten this. I used to write a column for our local newspaper, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which, like most metropolitan newspapers, has a very liberal editorial slant. Um, and I was talking to my editor one time, and she said this to me something that I felt was one of the most wonderful compliments I've ever gotten. She said, the only moderate I know who's not flaky or wishy-washy.
That is kind of a high compliment, but kind of sad about judging the other
Well,
models.
but I understood exactly what she
I
meant because
understand
people
it.
who call themselves moderate, it's sort of like, well, let's just sort of get along by being in the middle, as
Yeah.
opposed to taking a principled stand where I can fall out on some liberal positions and other conservative positions. And I have a reason why I believe these things. And I also recognize I have to live in a world with people who aren't like me and don't think like me. And
Yeah.
we have to figure out how to make it work because
Me too.
otherwise it's just chaos.
Having a position, you know, also requires a lot of self-reflection. And there's so many distractions in the world today. Like, and I love the world today. Like everything that's a distraction could also be here for our benefit. But if we follow those distractions, it's really easy to stay externally focused and then we outsource our happiness externally. Like there's a lot of bright, shiny objects externally. And I find that people who do have a position, especially, in healthcare, we talk a lot about ethics and they've done the inner reflections. They've taken something that happened and they're like, I need to ponder this and I need to reflect. Like, what does that mean? And then, in ethics, it's like, well, let's play that out. If that were the common way forward for everyone, like, how would that end? And like, you know, try these things on for size, interrupt your own thinking. And I think that's some of the skill set too we need to redevelop in people is that type of thinking so that you kind of know your positions. It's Simon Sinek's work, like know your own purpose so that you've got that true north that you can weigh things up against. And a lot of people are putting ideas out there that they think, but they haven't tried them on to say, is this really who I am or who I want to be?
Yeah, yeah, certainly we we need to know who we are before we can communicate anything to other people so they will trust us. Um, when it comes down to the way we communicate, there's this expression popular, soft skills, um, which always bothered me. My friend Kimi Hiratsu Zimski is a regular on this podcast. She likes to call them power skills,
Oh, I like
which
that. Yeah,
I
because the
really,
soft skills are the hard skills.
yeah, and it's sort of like, what do you do with people that just don't seem to have the sensitivity? Maybe they weren't raised that way. You know, my, your mother says, say please, say thank you, don't slam the door, tuck your chair in. Um, and if people don't grow up with that, and they live in a culture where it's becoming increasingly overlooked, I have to live in a world with people that are sometimes abrasive. And maybe I'm a little abrasive at times. Uh, I know Simon Sinek said on one occasion that he was talking about millennials at the time. This goes a few years back. He said, they grew up without parents parenting them. They grew up without teachers teaching them. And now it's the job of the bosses to step in and teach these people how to be adults.
Yeah. And I think we all arrived at the workplace with some developmental needs. And generationally, it's not like these, folks are bad, they don't know manners. They just arrived needing perhaps to learn some common rituals on how we gather, where I know that I showed up super naive about unethical behavior, or super naive about how we marginalize certain populations. Like, I think we all show up at the workplace with some work to do together. And the more tolerance we have by that, and I just really think, like, so much of the change, like, if you want um, something different, you go first. I think it's so much more powerful. I've got some little people in my life now, and they watch everything you do. And with older people in my life, like, I could stand there and go, these kids nowadays don't know how to push their chairs back in. I just shame base them. Instead of me narrating my care, when I get up in front of a 4-year-old, I go, you know what I'm going to do before we leave the restaurant? I'm going to go around and push everyone's chairs in. Do you want to help me? And then they may not even know the method to my madness. They're 16. They're like, I don't know why my yaya always, like, when she'd leave a restaurant, she would ask us to help her put all the chairs back in. And I think so many of us start wanting to invite people to change with a judgment, instead of just realizing that I'm sure there's things I do, especially culturally now, that the more diverse we get, there's things I do that my naivete offends others. And so, how can I give what I would hope to receive? And it's all that being based back into your own reflection. We're so quick to notice what's wrong with others, and not quick to say, here's, how love could help.
Yeah, and so you go back to Jewish philosophy. It's very much ingrained in our culture that we should expect more from ourselves and extend more grace to others. And we're not always good at it.
Yeah. Well, we're human. We got that dang human condition.
Yeah, yeah. And and again that sort of, it goes back to another form of that tension where, the teenagers in particular, having taught high school for so long and raised a few, um, that they're hypersensitive to hypocrisy.
Yes.
And hypocrisy is not setting a standard and falling short. Hypocrisy is preaching one thing with no intention of living up to it.
Isn't that interesting? That's where the shame comes in, right? That's why people hate hypocrisy. It's like, because people can forgive you falling short. Like, I want to work out 5 days a week. I only worked out 3. It's like, but you should work out. You should really watch your weight. And I'm going to go have an Oreo is like the ultimate hypocrisy, because it's judgmental of others, and, no intention on your own self.
Well, it's remarkable how fast an hour can go by.
It is crazy. It's crazy. I hope our conversation's been helpful to some folks. It's sure nice to
Oh, we
some
have a
of these deeper
comment
things.
here from Ephraim. He says, such a great conversation that applies to so many areas of life and all kinds of relationships! Exclamation point.
I love that. Good. Well, that at least one point of validation that conversations are um, worthy things to have.
So before we go, you have any final thought you'd like to leave us with?
I think the final thought for all of us is we resolve cognitive dissonance when we're faced with something that we don't understand, with simplicity and polarized thinking. And I just hope that we can stay uncomfortable and curious just 1 minute longer, um, and see what that does for our understanding of other people and our sense of being understood. I just really encourage people to not toggle down and take the easy way out.
Yeah, curiosity, I think, is one of the key factors. We need to be asking questions. We need to be asking ourselves questions, and we need to be learning all the time.
Yeah,
And if we do that, then okay, we're at least pointed in the right direction.
I would agree. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is always delightful, and if I can coax you back again, you're more than welcome. How can
We'll set up our
people?
annual visit.
Yeah, yeah. How can people find you, learn more about you?
So my name is Cy Wakeman. So it's Cywakeman. And you can find us out there. We do a lot on LinkedIn, and we do a bit on Instagram. We have a fantastic podcast ourselves called Reality Based Leadership. And our website's realitybasedleadership.com. So those are all the ways to get in touch with our work.
Well, thank you again for your time, for your wisdom, for your charm. I just love our conversations.
I do
Uh,
too.
and for those of you who are watching and listening, if you have a question, a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com. Use the contact information. Submit your idea. If it's compelling, we'll take it up in a future episode. And until then, as always, we encourage you to continue grappling with the gray. That's it for the streaming. And that's it for